Hello, hello. Welcome back. Thank you again. Our next presentation is Rona Birenbaum. She's the founder of Caring for Clients, one of Canada's first fee-only financial planning and wealth management firms established 20 years ago. And I just want to comment on that a little bit because almost all advisors sell you something. They make money from selling you something, but Rona offers her expertise and her opinion as a lawyer would in terms of paying for time and expertise. So it's such a good strategy for clients because you know that you're paying for expertise and you're not buying a product that someone has been told to sell. So we really, really appreciate this type of advice from advisors. Let's one more sec. Oh, Wealth Professional Magazine named Caring for Clients the top independent firm in Canada in 2017. And Rona is one of the top 50 advisors in Canada for 4 years in a row. She was recently named a Woman of Influence in Financial Services. Her team of 8 financial professionals serve the planning needs of Canadians coast to coast from 2 offices. She is a guest personal finance columnist for the Medical Post and Money Saver magazine. Yay. She is a volunteer with Junior Achievement, delivering financial literacy within the Toronto public school system, which again is something we highly endorse. My wife's a teacher, and there is nothing in high school that prepares people for even the basic simple things such as budgeting and what an investment is and what a dividend is and things like that. So she's a math teacher, and she's not here so I can say this. Financial planning, budgeting, and investing is far more useful than calculus and algebra in high school. So we endorse all of those things that Rona's involved in. So welcome.
Great. So I prefer to actually walk around a little bit. It helps with the nervous energy. So can everybody hear me? Wonderful. And now, yeah, we want to see the presentation there. Let's just make sure everything's working. I'm going to get my timer going. And I'm getting the timer going because I want to make sure there's 10 or 15 minutes at the end of my presentation for Q&A. And if you have a question and there isn't time for us to address it today, at the very end of the presentation will be my contact details. I didn't bring business cards. I generally don't travel with business cards, but I'm going to give you all the ways that you can connect with me. So when you see that slide, just mark down my email address or Twitter handle or whatever it is, and we can connect. So as you can see, the title here is Retirement Decumulation Strategies. And it's plural because there are more than one way. There is more than one way to actually draw down on your assets in retirement. But there's no financial presentation would be complete without the fine print. So there it is, okay? It's really, the point here is that I'll be giving some general advice and general information. It's not specific advice for each and every one of you, so just be careful in terms of how you use the information. Put it into the context of your own lives. I'd first like to do a survey of the room to get a sense of who is here. So with a show of hands, who here is retired now, fully retired? Okay, you're supposed to look like this. Okay. I don't know. I don't see this in my office very often, but okay. So that means the rest of you are pre-retirement, which means you look like that. You're worried, okay? This is what the media says you should be thinking and feeling based on the stage of life. But what I can tell you is everybody is a unique individual with unique goals, and the important thing is not to be the average person, and the average person is what most of the media and all of the general information that's out there is being geared towards. The content today is going to be driven by the 3 top concerns that I hear in my office on a regular basis, okay? And I hope that they're some of the things that are on your mind right now. And so pre-retirees and retirees, what they want to do is they want to figure out how can I pay as little tax as is absolutely legally necessary. Obviously, the less tax you pay, the more in your pocket to fund your needs. They also want to know how fast should I spend my money so that it doesn't run out before my time on this earth. So how do I make my money last? And then finally, it's what people think about is decumulation, and that is I have multiple types of accounts. I have money in a RIF or RSP, a TFSA, a non-registered account. In what order and in what proportion should I be withdrawing to fund my needs to ensure that the money doesn't run out and I pay as little tax as possible? So these are the kind of concepts and concerns that I've thought about as I wanted to share some insights with you today. And the first concept that I want to talk about is what I call, and I think is the elephant in the room, and that is what's called the 4% rule. Has anybody here heard about the 4% rule? Yeah, I should hope so, because it's been in the dialogue around decumulation since the early 90s, when a new set of research came out and put to bed what was, before that, the 5% rule. So there was a 5% rule, and then it became a 4% rule. And what it is the percentage of your portfolio that if you draw in the first year of your retirement and increase that withdrawal by inflation each and every year after that, there is a high probability that you will not outlive your money. And that analysis was done in the early 90s using stock and bond returns from 1926 to 1979. So even the data that was used to generate that 4% number is 50 years old. Okay, so things do change, and there has been updated analysis and research done. And in my research out there, I've seen now suggested withdrawal rates ranging from 3% as high as 6%. So what is an investor supposed to do with all this information? The reality is, using an arbitrary rule like this one to make your own personal decisions is fraught with a fair bit of danger. Because in my practice, we don't even think about what the percentage draw would be. We just want to show you whether or not you can live the life you want to. And that withdrawal pattern fluctuates over time. It doesn't happen in a straight line. I think you just look at your own lives and okay, well, we have to do a kitchen renovation in 10 years and the car's going to need to be replaced, and oh yeah, my daughter's getting married and I guess I got to put something towards that. These are the lumpy things that happen. So life doesn't happen in a straight line, so your financial decisions shouldn't be driven by kind of a straight line calculation. Now, there's a few reasons why the 4% rule is problematic. One is because your money may be in different buckets that have different tax treatments. Okay, and so drawing from a RIF or an RSP versus a TFSA leaves you with a very different after-tax outcome. And it's the after-tax money that you spend, not the before-tax withdrawal. Okay, so if you're drawing everything from a RIF, it's going to be a very different picture than if you start with non-registered and end with RIF, or some kind of reverse approach to your withdrawals. So how your money is structured matters, and clearly tax matters. The other factor that gets thrown, that is often ignored in this calculation, is whether you're a homeowner or not. In particular, a mortgage-free homeowner, or maybe you have a cottage or a secondary property in warmer climate for winter. In any case, whatever real estate you have, if you're willing and open to spending some or all of that equity to fund your long-term needs, then clearly you can spend more of your liquid assets in the early years of your retirement, because there's going to be a replenishment of capital later down the way. So maybe your number is 5, 6, or even 7%. Okay? But unless the real estate is factored in, you're perhaps underliving as well as you could in your early retirement years. Another factor that gets thrown into the equation and changes things is whether you want to leave an inheritance for family members or for charities, those kinds of things. And the larger you want your legacy to be, the lower your drawdown strategy, the less of your own capital you're going to be wanting to use in your lifetime. Now, there are other ways to fund estate legacy needs. Life insurance is one of them, but that isn't free. So if you buy a life insurance policy to fund an inheritance you want to create or a gift you want to make, you've got to pay the premium out of your cash flow during retirement. So there's a cost to that. And that can change whether the number for you is 4% or otherwise. Conversely, you might be expecting a significant inheritance. Now, you've got to be careful about planning on those things because it isn't your money, all right? So, but in some cases, to completely ignore the likelihood of an inheritance would also be a little bit unrealistic. So coming up with that kind of assumption and seeing how it factors into your drawdown strategy is really important. And then finally, do you have a big fat pension? I'm talking about those defined contribution pension plans that my generation and the younger generation would love to have. Certainly, if you've got an inflation-indexed corporate pension that keeps going up every year on top of CPP and OAS, which is also inflation-indexed, you might be more comfortable spending a little bit more of your capital during your most active years of retirement and letting the pension deal with your longer-term cash flow needs. So the bottom line here is that the 4% rule isn't a rule. It's what I call a shortcut. And it's a shortcut to make decisions easier, not to make decisions better, okay? So don't rely on it, please. Now, the next most popular concept that comes up is, should I take CPP now or later? Now, what this is showing you is a simple search comes up with 11 million search results for CPP now or later. And I know you're responsible for some of those inquiries, I just know it. And the media as well is all over this, and they're all over this subject because it is one of the #1 questions for individuals approaching retirement. Okay, so what's my view on that? Generally speaking, most people historically would just take it as soon as they've retired, and 65 was kind of the no-brainer age. Recent analysis and a lot of work by some very, very bright minds, Fred Vatisse is probably the most vocal on this right now. He's a former chief actuary of Morneau Chappell. He makes a very strong case for the benefit of deferring CPP to age 70. And if you want to see the case that he makes, you should take a look and find one or two of his books. They're great books. What I find is that he's right in most cases numerically. So when we do financial plans and we run scenarios, because by the way, running alternative scenarios for all of these decisions is the way you actually make the one that's right for you. But in our work, what we do is we say, okay, what if you took CPP at 65, 66, 67, and so on, and 70? And we just compare. And in most cases, at the end of the plan, which I have to tell you is age 95, so you have to live a long time, the person who delayed CPP to 70 generally has more money than they would at age 95 than they would have had they taken it at 65. Okay. What I find is the advantage is often quite marginal when you take inflation into consideration. Sometimes the net worth advantage at the end of the day is, let's say, $50,000. Okay, that sounds like a lot of money. You know, $50,000, you could buy a really nice car for that. But that might be 30 years from now, $50,000. So in inflation-adjusted numbers, that might only be $20,000. Okay? And you only really experience that benefit if you live well past age 85. Okay? So I understand why Canadians are reticent to delay. Okay? It's obvious if you're working to age 70, you're likely, you know, there's a good reason why I would be very comfortable delaying to 70. But I can tell you, when I talk to clients every day, unless that advantage is significant, they say to me, look, I have contributed to the CPP for 40 years. I don't want to wait anymore. It's one thing I hear. I get it. It's a long time to be contributing. What if the CPP isn't here and it runs out of money? I have to tell you, that's likely not going to be a concern for your generation or mine, or even possibly even my daughter's, because it's well funded for at least 75 years. But I understand the concern around that because there are no guarantees in life. And I also, the biggest issue I think though, is that by delaying CPP to 70, it requires you to draw down on your assets sooner, your savings sooner, if you retire at 65 or 60, whatever the number is. And there's making that transition from saving all of your life, building this nest egg up to create the financial security for you, and all of a sudden starting to spend that money, it's actually, it creates a lot of discomfort for people because you're used to seeing that pool of capital get bigger and bigger and bigger. And when you start to withdraw, it starts to feel a little, a little nerve-wracking for many people, seeing all of a sudden those values start to go down. So there's a psychological benefit to delaying drawing from those assets, and one of the ways to do that is to get income from another source, i.e. CPP and OAS. So my suggestion is just get the calculations done for you, but those calculations need to be done in the context of an overall plan, and a tax-sensitive one, because you run into things like the impact on the OAS clawback and other liquidity concerns that you might have. So the standalone calculation isn't enough. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say there. Finally, I want to talk about, it's not the last subject, but the last on this theme of decumulation, and that is, okay, from which account should I be drawing, in what order? And in addressing this particular concern, I'm going to highlight what I call the old-fashioned thinking and the recent or newer thinking. And in terms of the old-fashioned thinking, the idea was to defer drawing from your RSP, don't convert it to a RIF until you absolutely have to at age 71. And then you start taking the money out at age 72. So use your non-registered assets or your TFSA or generate some other source of income so that you can delay that as long as possible. And I understand why that was the thinking, because it's simple to understand. And we all know that when you pull a dollar out of an RSP or out of a RIF, it's taxed at a higher tax rate, than cash or non-registered money or money in a TFSA. So logically, wouldn't the right thing be to defer as long as absolutely possible? Well, newer thinking says, well, no, you should withdraw at a rate and at a time that results in the lowest overall tax burden for you over your entire plan, not just in one individual year. And the concept of income smoothing, which is what this steamroller is meant to signify, income smoothing has started to become into the awareness of the Canadian investor. And that is, perhaps it's advantageous to preemptively draw from your RIF or your RSP before age 72, preemptively maybe $10,000 a year, $20,000 a year, in order to capture some of the, what we call low-hanging fruit of the tax system, which is the very low rate of tax you pay for the first, for the first 14,000 or so, you don't pay anything. So if we see a case where somebody's going to be in a zero tax position for a few years, we want to get them to at least $14,000 of income, even if they don't need the money, because it's free. So we want to try and capture the lower tax rates to prevent a higher level of taxation down the road, and maybe the OAS clawback, all right? And again, we play with it. I have to say, financial planners, myself and my team, and all the planners I talk to, this is the fun of planning for us. Because we never know what the optimal strategy is going to be until we work with your numbers and your life plan. And when we do that and we start to play with, okay, well, what if we took out $10,000 a year? Okay, what if we did $12,000 a year? What if we did, and there's let's do $30,000 that year. And it becomes a very creative process. It's not a boring exercise for us until we come up with what we find is this magical, optimal solution that takes everything into consideration. Okay, so it sounds boring, but it's actually a heck of a lot of fun. So the old concept of deferring as long as possible, I think, is an old-fashioned one. Another outdated concept is how people have been mistakenly using TFSAs. Okay? And I understand it's a young product, it's 10 years old, so a lot of people are still using tax-free savings accounts for short-term emergency money, short-term or medium-term goals. The TFSA is your most powerful long-term growth engine. Stop, okay? If you are so advantaged and in the position to be able to not touch your TFSA, to grow it as aggressively as you're comfortable doing, to not touch it until the very end of your retirement lifeline, I guess, and if you're even able to continue to fund it during retirement, you're going to have a significant tax-free asset to spend at that time or pass on to the next generation. Okay, so it's one way of creating a tax-free estate pool of capital, and it's a very powerful way to grow your money. So think of the TFSA maybe a little differently than you have in the past. Also, I want to challenge your thinking around where your asset category should be. Old thinking. My fixed income should be in my RSP, my RIF, or my TFSA, because it's taxed at the highest rate, and my equity should be in my non-registered or taxable account. The rationale there seems quite logical. That is, all right, in any one calendar year, if I have the more fixed income I have in my taxable accounts, the higher my taxes are going to be in that one calendar year. So if you're getting your advice from an accountant, I can see why the accountant would recommend that you have all your equities in your non-registered account and all your fixed income in your RIF. But I'm sorry, I just want you to have as much money as possible, right? If you're paying more tax and you've done your planning, it's often because you've earned more growth or you have a larger pool of capital, right? So it makes, to have a tax-sheltered account that's languishing at 2 or 3% for 30 years, okay, sure, maybe you've paid less tax, but the thing hasn't grown. So where I see this quite often is, and because I even see advisors recommending this too, and the decision around it is, okay, what kind of an asset mix should you have? Okay, moderate risk tolerance. Okay, you should have 50% in equity and 50% in fixed income. Okay, now you should put all your fixed income in your RSP and all the equity in your non-registered account for tax purposes. Makes sense. But then I ask the client, because we've done these plans, and I say, now the optimal drawdown strategy for you actually means drawing down on your non-registered account over the next 5 years. The house is going to be sold to replenish the non-registered. There's a whole lot of reasons why for them, the next 5 years, they're going to be drawing out all their non-registered money. I looked at their portfolio, 100% equity in the non-registered, 100% fixed income in the registered. What happens if there's a bear market in the next 2 years? What that means for the client is they're going to they have a tough decision to make. They either have to sell the equities in their non-registered when they're down significantly, which they know they shouldn't be doing. The only alternative is withdrawing money from their RIF or their RSP, because that's where the safe money is. But now they've got a tax issue. All right, so the asset mix and where your assets are located, or where your equities and fixed income are located, should be driven not just by the tax piece. The tax tails should not wag the dog, as they say, in every decision. It's one of the factors, but other factors are, obviously, how much volatility can you tolerate before you abort a strategy? Nobody likes volatility, okay, but it's how you react to it that matters. And also, when are you going to need the money? So what's the time horizon for each of these individual accounts? I mean, that really matters. So what I would just say is be careful, again, using these what seem like simple and sensible rules of thumb to your own personal situation. And And I want to also bring up the subject of annuities, because this is as well a product that people think of as very old-fashioned product, okay? It's inflexible. Why would you buy an annuity when interest rates are as low as they are? There is some new thinking, and the new thinking is, again, outlined in Fred's book. He didn't pay me to talk about his book. It's just one of the best ones out there. He makes a pretty compelling case in what circumstances annuities might be the best way to ensure that you don't run out of money over the long term. So it's time to actually revisit the concept of annuities, and how we deal with that in our practice is, again, we model it, all right? So we run your projections, including the annuity to some degree, and not including the annuity. And we see what happens. Sometimes it doesn't work because the investor needs the capital faster than the annuity is going to give it to them, all right? So in that case, it's no good. So we keep assessing it every few years. We'll look at it just to see if the circumstances have changed and it makes more sense now than it did 5 years ago. So again, if annuity isn't right for you now, it might be right 5 years from now. So it's the kind of thing that needs to be revisited over time. And I can also tell you, it's sad to say, but the investment advisors tend not to talk about annuities, because it means you're going to take $200,000 or $300,000 out of your portfolio with them, and you're going to buy an annuity. And if they're not insurance licensed, they can't benefit in any way. Sad but true. So it's a reality of the industry. So I want to touch a little bit on estate planning, and this is kind of the last concept, because once you have your strategy for kind of how you're going to fund your own life and your own lifestyle, you start to turn thoughts to what happens after. And by doing some estate planning now, believe it or not, that can actually alter how you fund your own retirement needs. Okay. So it's worth addressing. Take a few minutes and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So I have to remember what I wanted to say about this. So many things to say. I mean, an estate planning presentation, that could be half an hour all by itself. So I just want to remind myself what aspect I wanted to talk about. Oh, yes. Okay. All right. As an estate goal factors back into your own retirement planning, you've got to first ask yourself the question and then answer the question, what is the relative importance to me of leaving a certain legacy versus funding my own vision of retirement? Because the more emphasis you put on the estate piece, it's going to come at your own personal cost. And that shows up because often when I meet with prospective clients, initially I start asking them about what are the things that are really important to them. And one of the things I say is, do you want to leave an estate? And they'll say, oh, yes, absolutely, I do. And I'll say, okay, how much? And for who? Oh, well, for my kids and such a person. And I say, okay, how much? $500,000, that should do it. Okay, that's fine. That $500,000 at your typical mortality date will be worth about $200,000 in today's dollars. Do you still feel that the $500,000 number is right? Yeah, I'm good with the $500,000. Great. There are two ways that you can fund that. You can segregate an asset in your portfolio that is untouchable. It isn't for you, it's for the next generation or the charity that you want to support. So that means you have less money to spend for yourself. Or you buy a life insurance policy for $500,000, so you don't have to worry about that estate that funding being there, and you can willy-nilly spend all your money and not worry about it. But either way, it's going to cost you now. And sometimes clients will, once I show them the difference in their lifestyle, so instead of being able to afford $60,000 per year in a typical year, you could have spent $75,000 if you weren't so worried about the estate. All of a sudden it's like, well, the kids will be all right. You know, Jane, she's working on her PhD, and and John, well, he's starting a business and I'm optimistic about it. So I think they'll be just fine. It's really funny. So once you have to start to quantify it and understand the impact, all of a sudden it changes a little bit. So just do the math, essentially, is what I'm suggesting. And also, I would just say that, again, a lot of the information on estate planning that you'll read in the media or any kind of industry marketing, just be careful, because lots of estate planning concepts in and of themselves look very compelling, but they create other problems. So there's unintended consequences. And one of the most common that I see, and if it's not relevant to you, just know that there are 10 others that I see all the time, mistakes. But one of the most common ones I see is, okay, you've got a parent who is now a widow, so they're on their own, and they decide that now that their spouse has passed away, that they're going to make their son the beneficiary of the RSP, which is $500,000, and they're going to make their daughter the beneficiary of the cottage, which is also worth $500,000. Now, you are all probably a little bit more knowledgeable than the average person on the street. You're here, you're learning. I'm sure this is not the first seminar you've come to. So you can start to see the problems in this. You know that the RSP, when received, is going to go completely $500,000 to the son, okay? The estate tax cost is part of the estate. That son is not responsible for that. The cottage, all right, gets sold. There might be some tax to pay. We know there's certainly some tax on the RSP. So there's a $250,000 tax bill on the RSP. The cottage has to be sold to pay that tax bill, leaving the child that was supposed to get the cottage with $250,000 and the son with $500,000. So beneficiary designations are one of the most common mistakes that people make, and they're trying to do the right thing. They're saying, if I name a beneficiary, I'm going to avoid probate. And some of the biggest estate planning mistakes are probate avoidance strategy. The cost of probate, and again, this is another presentation altogether, but the cost of probate is 1.5% over a certain threshold, about $50,000. So to save 1.5% once, I cannot tell you the costs that people bear between now and that date just to save 1.5%. And then it possibly creates all sorts of inequities and problems after the fact. So be careful with probate planning. It can actually create a lot of unintended effects. One of the ways to actually plan forward your estate is actually to do an estate analysis. So in a properly drafted financial plan, once a client has settled on this is the path, it represents my priorities, my family's priorities, then we say, okay, now we're going to show you your potential estate tax burden. Let's figure out if we need to do anything about that. So this chart, it's a busy one, and it isn't the complete chart, okay? So don't try to really extract anything from this except the column that, or the row that is about 2/3 of the way down that says additional income taxes, okay? So the first one says additional income taxes of $1,056,000. That's if this couple together died now, in this calendar year. And then every column after that is an incrementally older age. The last one, where the tax bill is only $150, is when they're 95. So if one of the two in the couple lived to 95, they do not have a tax problem at all. Okay, well, essentially the way the plan looks in the moment. So really, within the first 10 years of the plan, so between the time that they were like 65 and 75, okay, they'd have about $1 million in taxes to pay. So first of all, you ask the question, what are the odds that both of us are going to go in the next 10 years? Do I need to worry about that? And then secondly, because what all people focus on is the actual number, $930,000. But then look at the net estate after taxes. The beneficiaries in column 2 are going to get $3.2 million after tax. So the question is that enough? And if it's enough, then we don't have a problem. Because again, to cover off the tax bill, you need to find a way to have more money coming into your pockets or into your circumstance, and that's life insurance usually, is typically the way to address that. And that's gonna have a cost. What this also illustrates to you is that your estate planning, both the tax impacts and maybe the legal considerations, family dynamics, changes over time. So in this case, if the client had an adverse reaction to just knowing that $930,000 is going to be their final tax bill, right? Then maybe we get insurance. But do you really think they need a high-cost, long-term permanent insurance policy? No, the need is only for about 10 years. After that, maybe 15. After that, it doesn't exist. So really, they only need a 15-year term policy, which isn't going to be very expensive, if they want to mitigate this happening in the first 15 years. After that, it's not an issue. Why should they keep paying life insurance? Right? Maybe if they just want to make the estate bigger, that's different. Okay? So adapting and adjusting your estate plan is, and maybe updating your will, is part of what you need to do as a retiree. I mean, it applies to anybody in life. Your financial plan and your estate plan is something that is changing and circumstance changing. You should review it on a regular basis. And so the key takeaway, I think, I'm hoping I've done a reasonable job of sharing with you, is that you are unique. And you're going to learn a lot of great stuff at this conference. All I ask of you is to not just go 100% forward using one little concept that you learn over these 2 days. Look at the information and put it into context and integrate it into all other aspects of your life and of your planning. Because, it can look like a very good idea all by itself, but your life is a lot more complex than one financial concept. And so let me just check my time. 11:22, 10:45. We have 10 minutes for questions. Great. I believe there are some microphones, or you can just raise your hand. There's a gentleman. Yes.
If I want to retire at 60, what's the percentage that the government's going to give me less? Than 65.
Right. So the question is, what percentage, and I assume you're talking about CPP or OAS? Right. Okay, so for every year, it's really for every month that you don't take CPP from 65, they're discounting it. On the discount side, I believe it's 8.4% a year. The number's been changing over the years, but I think it's a discount of 8.4% a year, but it's not done on an annual basis. It's based on a monthly, right? So for example, you don't even have to decide whether you take your CPP at 60 or 61 or 62. It's by the month. So every month that you take it earlier than 65, it's discounted. And every month you delay it, it's also increased. So I can tell you that it works out to be about a 42% hit if you take it at 60 than 65. And the 42% discount on your CPP, that's the base at which you're getting your inflationary assumptions. So it's a bit of a double whammy because you're getting your inflationary increases on a lower amount. But that can still make sense for some people, funnily enough. Yes, Lee.
You share your opinion of the security of CPP, and many people are considering taking OAS before CPP.
Yes.
That calculation. What's your opinion on the security of OAS?
I'm really glad you asked about. The question was, I suggested CPP is rock solid for our generation, but what about OAS? And I didn't say OAS because old age security is funded by tax revenues. Okay? It is not a pool of capital like the CPP is. So the sustainability of the OAS system is reliant on solid finances of our country and political will. And that's why, I don't remember how many years ago it was now, it could be 10 when the OAS clawback came in. But essentially, what the government decided at a certain point of time is that we can't afford the model of OAS, the way it's designed. So we need to find a way to have it cost us less. And that was the introduction of the income thresholds for clawback of benefits. So what can happen in the future is really hard to say. But what I would suggest is that if you had a choice to take OAS or CPP and one of them early, I would take OAS early personally, just because its future is less certain than the CPP. But I don't want to really concern you, because my feeling is because it's income tested, you can play around with your income. So there's a lot of very wealthy people that get all their OAS. I want you to know that, because their taxable income is 50, but they're withdrawing 200 of capital every year, which doesn't fall on the tax return. So they're getting all the OAS, and it's my job to help them do that. So, so just know that this is happening. So I anticipate down the road that OAS might be asset tested, not just income tested. I don't see that happening for maybe 10 years or 15 years. But that's the next thing that could happen. And over the very, very long term, yeah, who knows? Who knows? Because it's not funded with real money at the moment. Yeah. Yes, it is less. If all we're doing is comparing CPP and OAS, CPP has billions and trillions of dollars, and OAS, there's no pool of money there. But I don't want to worry anybody about that. Yeah. Okay, you're standing at the mic, so I ought to give you a spot.
Thank you. That was a really balanced presentation. Thank you. I did read Fred Vitesse's book. But I think your presentation actually was better than his book by a long shot.
Oh! Impossible.
Well, anyway, I'd just like to just ask about the tax efficacy of various types of income. This usually applies to, well, it takes in registered as well as non-registered. But could you comment, please? I have always been under the impression that income is basically the tail that wags the dog for dividend tax and capital capital gains. So I always felt that if you can minimize the actual taxable income, the others fall into line more favorably. So can you comment on taxable income versus the tax that you pay on capital gains and dividends?
Okay, so just don't go away, because I might need some clarification on your question. I don't see any distinction between income, dividends, capital gains, pension, annuity. They're all income. So let me first say income is any source of cash flow coming into you. There's earned income, your salary, there's pension income, and there's income from your investments. Within that, there are three different main categories from a tax standpoint: dividends, capital gains, and interest. Capital gains being the lowest tax rate on those, followed by dividends, and running up the pack is interest. So with that, how can I help answer your question?
Well, I was always under the impression that the interest category, if you keep that as low as you can, the other categories are more favorably taxed. Is that?
That's 100% true. Yeah. So nothing I said today contradicted that. So if we're looking at your tax situation for 2020, and we say, if your portfolio was all in bonds versus all in equities that pay no dividends and just appreciate, versus a combo, which is dividend income, dividends, equities, which one would be better from a tax standpoint? The answer would be the stocks that don't pay dividends and just go up in value. That's your best, right? Now, a lot of the right things have to happen for that to work out in your favor in that one tax year, but you're absolutely right that that's the way the tax system works. Yeah, and I appreciate the question, because if that wasn't clear, then I'm glad it is. I'm going to take one more, and then what I'm going to suggest is, if you want to reach out after, ask me any questions, because I actually have to scoot after this presentation in about 15 minutes. Feel free to reach me any of these ways. So take a pen, write it down, or just Google me. I think my name's in the program, and you can Google me and find me. So, sir, in the very front, we'll wrap up with you.
The complexity of it is amazing to me. But what the question generates for me, what is the range of price you get for your, you pay for your service,
Okay.
top and bottom.
Okay, so the question was, he's starting to understand the complexity of this, and so he's saying, so what does it cost for a financial plan by a firm like us? Now, it's not my father, and so I didn't plant him there to I go, you look like a very lovely man. So a comprehensive financial plan for somebody that doesn't have a corporate structure is $4,500. It's a flat fee, right? It's usually about 3 or 4 client meetings. There's a whole lot of education, a lot of back and forth. For individuals that have more complex affairs, like they have a holding company, multiple real estate properties, maybe a family trust, we're looking at $6,500 and up. So that's essentially it. We're generally middle of the pack as far as prices are concerned. We're not the most expensive, but we're certainly not the least expensive. What I can say is that we're the most experienced.
As I go to that, you suggested looking at it every few years.
Yeah.
What's your idea of time frame in between?
How often should you review and reframe your financial plan? If you track your progress yourself after a plan is done, because it tells you what your financial position should be under all the set of circumstances 2 years from now, what your portfolio value should be, how much you should have in certain places, etc. If your reality is lining up with the plan, unless you have a specific question, you don't really need a full review. If they're not, if you're running well ahead or well behind and you want to figure out what to do about that, then an update would be a good idea. Or a major change in circumstances, okay? A major change in your own life circumstances. So there you go. So I've got to wrap it up here. Thank you for your attention. I've really enjoyed it.